Grief does not arrive like thunder, it creeps in under the doorframe, quiet as dust, until a house becomes unlivable. That was the air inside the Quartermain mansion when Brooke Lynn's world tilted, subtly at first, then all at once, on the words no one is ever ready to hear. A call, a clipped voice, a shiver in the space between heartbeats, Ned is down. The man who straddled old money and hard-won conscience, whose stubborn pride could fill a boardroom and a ballroom alike, had been felled not by an enemy in a suit but by the hidden rebellion of his own heart. It was a medical line item when the doctors said it, massive myocardial infarction, urgent coronary bypass, but for Brooke Lynn it felt like the sudden collapse of a family wing that had been propping up everything she knew about where she came from and where she was allowed to go. For days, she had lived inside a different storm, petty arguments, lingering resentments, the kind of squabbles that scrape at the varnish of a relationship until everything looks uglier than it is. Harrison Chase, with his steady gaze and principled spine, had kept meeting her at dead ends where pride circled the block and came back as silence. Their rhythm had been off, two perfectly good dancers, both staring at the floor. And then the ground changed. An emergency has a clarifying power that no apology can replicate. When Brooke Lynn heard bypass, she wasn't thinking about their last fight. She was already halfway to the hospital, the old Quartermain drive churning under her wheels, breath clamped tight, counting out the seconds because numbers were the only thing that didn't cry. Port Charles General is a strangely democratic place. Past and present, royalty and rookies, all pass through the same fluorescent glow, equalized by vulnerability. Brooke Lynn arrived as if breaking a curfew that no longer mattered, the nurse's station blinking its patient notifications like a strange constellation she didn't know how to read. The logistics slapped her first, consent forms, surgical risk, the jargon of grafts and vessels and pump time, while the emotions came second, an aftershock that threatened to drop her to her knees. She needed a translator for both worlds, someone to decipher the medical language and to keep her from shattering under the weight of everything that could happen if a scalpel missed its millimeter. And so she reached for Chase, not out of habit but necessity. What does a person do when the person who always seemed made of oak is suddenly a collection of ifs? She dialed, and her voice had no filter left in it. Fear took the edges off every syllable. She did not ask him to forgive anything. She asked him to come. He did not speak about statistics, he told her where he was and how quickly he would get to her, the answers of a man who doesn't require a script when someone he loves is drowning. Chase's arrival was not heroic in the cinematic sense. There were no swelling strings, no slow motion as he crossed the lobby. He simply stepped into her orbit and reoriented it. He found her with her shoulders squared and trembling like a bridge in high wind. He put a hand between her shoulder blades, not possessive, just present, and the contact lit up a small, stubborn warmth inside her. The mind likes to bargain with catastrophe. If I'm strong enough, if I don't cry, if I keep asking competent questions, the universe will return my father unchanged. Chase did not dismantle her bargaining, he sat inside it with her and became the room in which she could finally breathe. The surgeon's briefing was a choreography of conditional verbs. Should, might, can, and a blunt inventory of risk. A blocked artery is a map with a bridge out, a bypass is the stubborn engineering that says the town at the far end does not get to disappear. Brooke Lynn listened as if memorizing a libretto she never intended to perform. She had her Quartermain face on, the one you wear when donations are pledged or litigation is hinted. But Chase could see the smaller child beneath that mask, the one who had learned early that love in this family could be loud and complicated, that survival often looked like wit sharp enough to deflect and armor strong enough to conceal. Waiting is a cruel pedagogue. It teaches without consent, layering lesson upon lesson until the student is all bruise and understanding. In the surgical family lounge, a place designed to be forgettable, time stretched thin and mean. Brooke Lynn tried to command herself into composure by cataloging. She made a list of grudges she'd been planning to revive and quietly crossed them out. She conjured the rooms where Ned's voice still lived, the study where he hid his disapproval behind his newspaper, the terrace where he said pride without saying I'm proud of you, the boardroom where he pretended she wasn't his heart because he didn't know how to be seen loving that openly. She watched the door. she kept watching it. When it opened for a nurse who wasn't theirs, her breath shrank to a pin. When it closed, it stole 2 beats on its way out. Chase did the thing good men do when the person they love is made of glass. He didn't press. He kept her hydrated. He made sure her phone was charging so she wouldn't miss updates she'd already memorized. He talked when she needed space from silence, and he was quiet when the conversation threatened to become a weapon. He told one small, ridiculous story about a rookie mistake he'd made on patrol, something about a raccoon and a dumpster and a form he would never live down, and she laughed at the wrong moment and then cried anyway. She apologized, which was absurd, and he shook his head. He wasn't there to cure emotion, he was there to catch it. Family arrived in drips and floods, those who had fought the longest with Ned, those who loved him best because they refused to keep score. Quartermains grieve like they do everything, at high volume and with an underlying competence that makes outsiders think the chaos is intentional. Voices rose and fell, old slides took a number and sat down, everyone smelled faintly of stress and cologne. Brooke Lynn hovered at the center because lineage made it so, and yet she felt like a trespasser in a museum that still charged her for admission. Once, years ago, she'd decided she could only exist in this family on her own terms or not at all. Now she discovered there was a third option, existing in the fierce ambiguity of belonging while terrified of losing the person who taught you how to bear that ambiguity. There is a particular loneliness to being a child at a parent's bedside, even when the parent is a veteran of so many wars, corporate, personal, civic, that you start to think the heart is just another set of minutes to purchase with stubbornness. The surgeon finally came, hands clean, eyes honest. The words were professional, but the summary was human. He is fighting. We did what we set out to do. The road is not short. Relief crowded the hallway like a tide. Someone exhaled so loudly it felt like a shout. Someone else sat down and didn't stand for a very long time. In the ICU, machines sang their quiet mechanical lullaby. Tubes organized themselves around Ned like strange, faithful vines. He didn't look like a titan, he looked like a man the world had insisted be larger than a living body can get. Brooke Lynn measured her courage and found it just enough to approach the bed. There's a sublanguage children speak to sleeping parents, sentences shaped for ears they cannot be sure are listening. She spoke to him without moving her mouth much, as if sound itself could trigger alarms. She told him the most ordinary things, where she parked, the sweater she actually found in the dryer, the song stuck in her head, because sometimes the mundane is the only raft that floats on a flood of fear. And when her voice faltered, she reached behind her, and Chase's hand was there again, the map to shore. In another version of this day, the specter of old loves and present complications would have intruded. Names like Willow would have bubbled up. Memories of other crises would have auditioned for attention. But in this room, the hierarchy was simple. A man had come close to being erased from his life. A woman who had once weaponized her own fragility to survive was relearning how to lay it down. A man who values duty above drama made a new kind of promise without ever saying the word, I am here, no matter what name you think you have to be to deserve me. The hours after surgery are a discipline. They require the vigil to become pragmatic, charting medication times, learning the choreography of nurses, absorbing the etiquette of beeps. Brooke Lynn took to it with the precision of a producer and the devotion of a daughter. She organized visitors like a benevolent tyrant, defended the quiet hours as if they were territorial waters, and developed the particular sensibility of the ICU faithful, who can tell you when a monitor is anxious and when it's merely bored. The first time Ned's eyelids fluttered, she caught the movement like a hawk spots a ripple in the grass. His eyes opened to the blur of sterile light and the soft geometry of 2 faces leaning in, one that looked like his past distilled into a stubborn melody, one that looked like a promise he hadn't known he'd made. Recovery is never just a medical process in Port Charles, it's a referendum on every choice that led to the bed. As hours turned into a fragile day, the crisis began to cast a longer shadow, revealing the silhouette of what would come next. Business rivals would circle, family historians would rewrite, everyone would have an opinion about how near death should remake a life. But Brooke Lynn felt something quieter blooming beneath the headlines. She'd been holding two weights for too long, the need to be the perfect quartermain and the terror of loving someone enough to risk the humiliation of dependence. Crisis, cruel tutor that it is, had taught her that bravery is not an armor but a hinge. It allows a door to open that stubbornness keeps shut. So she did the most radical, unquartermain thing a quartermain can do. She let herself rely on someone without turning it into a transaction. In the days that followed, she didn't narrate how strong she was. She let Chase see the unvarnished version: messy hair, bad coffee, midnight worry, the laugh that runs out of breath and becomes a sob. He never looked away, not once. When he needed to step out, for statements, for sleep, he told her exactly how long he would be gone and then beat his own estimate by 10 minutes. His steadiness did not erase the pain, but it changed its shape, the way a mountain becomes navigable when someone knows the switchbacks. When families heal, even temporarily, they do it like stained glass catching light, fractures turn to pattern by the angle of grace. Ned's color returned in increments. The bypass grafts held. The surgeon's language slid from conditional to declarative. Physical therapy lurked, and with it the humbling of starting small, a breath deeper than yesterday, a step heavier than it looks, a joke that costs 3 spoons of energy but buys an hour of normalcy. Brooke Lynn started to imagine future scenes without rehearsing the disaster exit. She heard her father's voice in her head telling an old story about a meeting that went sideways and how he righted it with a line so sharp it cut through pretense. She smiled because she wanted to hear the line again, from the source, and for the first time she believed she might. Chase never asked to be applauded, so Brooke Lynn applauded him anyway, but in her language. One hand on his knee during a late-night coffee, a thank you that went past words, a decision to stop picking fights with silence. They didn't declare anything monumental in the hallway. They didn't choreograph a new relationship around hospital vending machines. What they did was choose, again and again, in small ways, to stand close enough that both could feel the draft when the other breathed. When Willow's name drifted through someone else's conversation, it did not puncture the room. Life is full of ghosts, but they have to be invited to dinner to eat with you. In the end, the emergency didn't erase the past. It revealed the usable parts. It polished the piece of Brooke Lynn that had been dulled by survival and showed her she could carry both legacy and love without needing to set one down to pick up the other. It showed Chase that his brand of faithfulness is not a posture but a practice, that being a shield is not the same as being a wall. And it reminded everyone orbiting the Quartermain's sun that power means very little until it is poured into care, the hardest, most ordinary work in the world. When Brooke Lynn finally stepped outside for air, the night had the tender chill of a town that has learned to keep its lights on for the returning. She looked up at a sky that had not blinked once during the hours she'd counted and felt, for the first time since the call, a strange, steadying gratitude. Her father was still here. The future looked like a narrow bridge, but it held. Behind her, in a room that smelled like antiseptic and hope, a monitor kept time with a heart rumored to be indestructible and now proven simply human. Beside her, a man she once believed she could lose to hesitation waited without hurry. Port Charles would provide the plots, villains, schemes, rebounds, re-elections. It always does. But inside this quieter story, 2 people had practiced something rarer than victory. How to hold the line when the world asks you to break. And as dawn began to stitch a pale seam along the horizon, Brooke Lynn learned the lesson the hard night had come to teach. Reliance is not surrender. It is the courage to let someone share the weight while you walk, one measured breath at a time, toward whatever comes next.